Good evening. I'm excited to be here. I'm sure you are as well. I want to thank the candidates for being here and welcome you all to the campus of New England College and the Putnam Center for this important debate between the candidates vying for the Republican nomination for the U.S. Senate. This is our Live Free or Die debate week. I am Chris Ryan, the host of New Hampshire Today on iHeartRadio. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our sponsor, the nonpartisan sponsor of our primary and general election debates, AARP New Hampshire, our host, New England College, our partner, the union leader, you in the audience, our listeners and viewers, and of course, the candidates here tonight. Just some brief ground rules. Each candidate will have 60 seconds to respond to each question, and a 30-second rebuttal will be issued at my discretion. The goal tonight is to have the candidates engage with one another and discuss their solutions to the problems facing Granite Staters. In doing so, they will respond to each panelist question when prompted by the moderator. Coin flips to determine the order the questions go in and the order of our closing statements. So obviously it's an important event. We want to remind everybody to go out and vote on September the 13th as well on primary day. As Josh mentioned, we're going to applaud now for the candidates here tonight, and that will be the final applause or noise until hopefully the end of the contest. And I'm going to start by introducing the individual on my left and move down the line, Mr. Bruce Fenton.
Thank you very much.
Senator Chuck Morse. Mr. Vikram Manchramani. Mr. Kevin Smith. And General Don Bolduc. Now, I'm very excited to be joined by our three panelists this evening. Senior editor Mike Cody of the Union Leader, journalist Josie Grove from the Union Leader as well, and New Englander student journalist Lily Geber. We're going to start with our first question tonight from Mike Cody of the Union Leader, and that question is on inflation.
Good evening. Consumers have been hit hard with higher prices for just about everything as fallout from the pandemic, the supply chain, and the war in the Ukraine affect energy prices, food prices, and other commodities. What steps does the federal government need to take to arrest inflation and protect the economy from future shocks?
And this question goes to Bruce Fenton.
Thank you very much. Inflation is caused by broken money, and the politicians have broken the money. This is a cycle that started over 20 years ago. Really, actually, it was 51 years ago when we went off of the gold standard. The U.S. dollar used to be backed by something real, a real form of money, gold, which had been recognized for hundreds and hundreds of years as a form of money. In 1971, they went off of the gold standard and created what we have now, which is just simply pictures of dead presidents that people call money. And the politicians print it from thin air without accountability and with wild abandon for increasingly reckless bailouts of cronies and projects and pork projects and Green New Deals and things like this. The printing of new money from thin air without accountability is what has caused inflation. That is what is causing inflation. And any politician who says they can easily fix it is most likely lying, or they don't understand the situation. The way to fix it is to go back to a sound money standard and exercise sound economic policies. Thank you.
Senator Morse.
Yes, thank you. The way to fix it is to stop the spending and stop the borrowing. That's what we need to do. Maggie Hassan can't understand that. Maggie Hassan thinks that the only way to make things happen in Washington is for Washington to do it. She wants to fund education and spend $1 trillion right now to write checks. That's an insult to everyone in the state of New Hampshire that's paid their own bills and signed on the dotted line to do it, and every parent that worked hard to send their kids to school. She signed on an infrastructure bill that she spent over $1 trillion on and came back to New Hampshire and said, here we are. Here's New Hampshire's share of it. We were 51st in the nation when Maggie delivered that bill. She can't stop spending. We need to end this. We need to go to Washington and live within our means, exactly like we do here in New Hampshire. We're the envy of the Northeast because of the way we govern in New Hampshire and the way we budget in New Hampshire. Let's take that to Washington and do it the 603 way.
Mr. Manchramani.
Yes, well, thank you very much. I think one major cause of the inflation that we face today is really energy policy. We have a really socially driven energy policy that begins with a climate alarmism, where we've chosen to beat up cheap, reliable energies that can power our economy. Fundamentally, that extra energy cost has bled through into all goods and services. I've been fortunate to serve on the board of a trucking company, and I can tell you that the cost of diesel has driven up the cost of freight. And anything moved by a tractor trailer will therefore have higher costs. So a bad energy policy, where we went from energy independence, able to export energy to our friends and our allies, to an energy policy where we are dependent upon countries that hate us, is not a good policy. It's producing inflation, it's putting our country at risk in a geopolitical sense, and it's absolutely hurting all Granite State families. Inflation is a tax. We are paying the tax bill for bad policy.
The question again is addressing inflation, and we continue with Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Chris. I mean, let's not forget how we got here. We've had so much money flooding the system right now between all of the COVID relief monies, the infrastructure bill, this latest reckless college loan bailout. We're devaluing the dollar. The way we get back to bringing down inflation and making the economy booming again is going back to what we were doing just a couple of years ago. Number one, we need a balanced budget. We haven't had a balanced budget since 1994, when we had a Republican Congress and Bill Clinton was president. I've said let's go back to having the Graham-Rudman Amendment, which called for an actual balanced budget, and there were automatic budget cuts if we didn't have one every year. We need to cut the individual tax rate. We need to cut corporate tax rates. Let's repeal the Jones Act, which puts higher costs on shipping around liquefied natural gas and oil. And let's end a lot of the environmental regulations. And I also agree with Vikram. We have to become energy independent again, because so much of these higher costs are dependent on moving goods and services around. If we have higher energy costs, that eats into it.
General Bolduc, how do we control inflation and address it?
Well, thank you. And I want to say hello to everybody, and particularly this place, because I taught here for 2 years as an associate professor. Have some students in the audience, and it's good to see you, Lily. God bless you, dear. Well, it's simple. It's not difficult. It's common sense, and that's what we lack down there. We have energy dependence now. We need energy independence. We need to reinitiate the XL pipeline. We need to reverse all of Biden's policies that have put us in a situation in which we are energy dependent. We need to start drilling. We need to start fracking. We need to start drilling offshore. We need to start drilling in Antarctica. Yes, we need to focus on a balanced budget, and I agree with that. We have to cut taxes. We have to. It's essential. People can't live. They're suffering out there. I've seen the moms and dads. This is what we need to do to bring America back where it needs to be.
We'll hand things back over to Mike Cody, senior editor at the Union Leader, for a question on the Federal Reserve.
The Federal Reserve has raised interest rates 1/4 percentage point in March, the first hike in more than 3 years. The Fed has raised rates twice since then and has signaled continued hikes in 2023 as it attempts to tame inflation. Is this the right path forward?
And we'll start with Senator Morse.
I think it is the right path forward. We had June, where we had 9.5% inflation. We had July, where we had 8.5% inflation, and we're going to be slightly over 8% inflation this month. That takes you as a citizen a whole month just to pay that increase, that new tax that they created in Washington. That's what it's going to take. The Federal Reserve needs to fight inflation till we get it down to a percentage that this country can live with. And we certainly need to send the message as Republicans that we're going to fight. We're going to make sure that we stop the spending and we stop the borrowing in Washington. It's Republicans, you know, that should lead in this whole charge. We do it here in New Hampshire. We do a great job of it. They're not doing it in Washington. It's Democrats and Republicans that aren't doing it in Washington. Let's send a strong message by sending me down to Washington, and let's do it the way we do it here in New Hampshire. Let's budget and live within our means. Let's not put new taxes in place.
Thank you, Senator Morse. Mr. Manchamani.
Yeah, look, I think the Federal Reserve has been actually causing a large portion of the financial volatility and economic volatility that we've been experiencing over the last 15 to 20 years. Nevertheless, Fighting inflation requires higher interest rates to slow the spending. It requires higher interest rates to change the capital investing logic. It is a difficult problem. It's not the only solution to lowering inflation, excuse me. We can actually, for instance, loosen up some of the constraints on H-1B visas, employer-sponsored visas, where you can have more labor come into the market, reducing some of the labor price pressures. There's a lot of solutions. We need a business-oriented approach down in D.C. to help address this. I've spent 30 years in the business world running around helping companies all over the world navigate uncertainty, financial uncertainty, supply chain uncertainty, and understand risks that come from geopolitics as well as inflation. That's what we need. We need a business approach to handle this problem.
Next, Mr. Smith, and the question is in regard to the Federal Reserve and the increases we've seen in the interest rate.
It's a little too late. I think the Fed should have stepped in sooner, quite frankly. And I would agree with Senator Paul. I think it is time to have an audit of the Fed because I do believe they manipulate our markets to some extent. But look, I want to go back to talking about having a balanced budget. You know, we do this in our own households. We do it in all levels of government. I did it as town manager of Londonderry for 9 years. In fact, the last budget that I proposed to the voters before I stepped down was actually lower than the previous year's operating budget at a time when inflation was 7%. And you do that by making tough decisions and looking and having the taxpayers in mind the most. And that's what we need to do on the federal level again. There's no reason why we can't go back to having a balanced budget on the federal level. That would help, again, grow our economy. We did that in Londonderry. By cutting taxes, we brought in more business, we grew the pie, and that's the way you stimulate the economy in this country.
General Bolduc.
Yeah, you know, none of this makes any sense to the average Granite Stater. I've been out there. When you talk in these terms, they don't really know what you're saying. It's simple. We just have to stop the spending. We have to say hell no to spending. It's Congress that's caused these problems. The Federal Reserve, it's not federal, and it's not a reserve. It's run by 5 private banks, and it lives on the fact that we're in debt. And the problem with this resides in Congress. Their irresponsibility with the budget, their irresponsibility with taxes. That's what the American people understand. They understand that they get a paycheck and so much comes in and so much goes out. They want their government to behave that way. And the Federal Reserve is not making that happen. It is actually hurting us. And I get it, you know, all these fancy schmancy, business models and all this other stuff. It doesn't resonate with people. They want a real person down there that's going to say hell no to spending, and we're going to start in Congress and we're going to stop it. That's me. Thank you.
Mr. Benton.
Yeah, the Federal Reserve is based on a very antiquated idea that politicians in fancy offices can pull levers and decide how the economy will unfold, or that they can control inflation. And the fact is, politicians have been trying that since before any of us were born. And as somebody who's been in finance for 30 years, I understand that they can't. They can't simply control the economy by pulling levers from fancy offices in marble buildings that they bought with money they stole from the taxpayer. It doesn't work. The root of the problem, again, is the broken money. They've broken the money by printing it from thin air with wild abandon. And all of the adjustments in interest rates in the world are not going to fix that. The root of the problem is this broken money that's used to bail out cronies. It's the Maggie Hassan, the Elizabeth Warren money. And it's a broken system. So the root of that is to fix the broken money, and we can do that by auditing the Fed and, more importantly, ending the Fed.
Now we turn to Lily Geber with the New Englander, a student journalist, with a question on student debt.
President Biden recently announced a plan to forgive up to $20,000 in student loan debt for low and middle income borrowers. If you don't agree with this plan, what's a reasonable alternative solution to help Americans seek higher education and avoid starting off with a mortgage-sized debt?
Mr. Manchermani.
Yeah, look, thank you for the question, Lily. It's an important question, and I think fundamentally it is what's wrong with Washington, D.C. We have absolutely given up the sense of personal responsibility, and we're encouraging those to take out loans that get stuck with loans to turn around and complain. I worked for 6 years after college to pay back my loans. You know, I took that personal responsibility seriously. What about the truck driver who didn't choose to go to college, didn't take out student loans? Is he getting a check? Is he going to get a refund for not going to college? What about me? Do I get a refund? This is not fair. This is socialism. We are wiping off debt, and it's not the government paying back that debt. You know what it is? It's all of us that's going to have to pay back that debt. This is a tax. This is more spending. This is more stimulus. This is going to cause more inflation. And the numbers, the government, the Democrats couldn't even tell you how much it was going to cost. First it was $300 billion. Now it may be $1 trillion. This is a lot of money. There's got to be a better way.
Mr. Smith.
Well, this question really hits home for me. One, because I just paid off my last student loan a number of months ago this year. And we're right now putting our oldest child into his first year of college. We just dropped him off at Keene State a couple of weeks ago. First of all, let's call this move for what it was. This was an election year bribe and nothing else. And frankly, I believe it's unconstitutional, and I certainly hope the legislative branch challenges the executive branch on it. This was a reckless transfer of debt from the person that owns it to all of us now. Here's what we really need to do, though. Number one, we need to look at these institutions and ask why they're raising their tuitions higher and higher and higher and asking them, what are their efficiency plans? Maybe we should have these federally guaranteed loans tied to the schools making themselves more efficient. Or maybe we shouldn't have federally backed loans, which really puts no onus on the lender when they're giving out these loans. And lastly, let's celebrate and look at alternative forms of schooling, such as community colleges and trade schools as well.
General Bolduc, the question is in regard to student loans, and is there an alternative plan if you do not like what President Biden did in wiping out student loans up to $10,000?
Yep. You take out a loan, you use it, you pay it back. It's a simple plan, and that's what resonates with Granite Staters. Anyone who takes out a loan, student loan or anything like that, these payoffs, these things that the government has done has put us in debt so severely, and it's hurt Granite Staters. And that's what Granite Staters say. They don't want your debt. They don't want to pay your debt. I don't want to pay your debt. There is no replacement for this other than responsibility, and that's the problem in this society right now. We haven't taught accountability and responsibility, and we see at the highest levels of our government, local government, state government, and federal government. And this is the cause. People don't want to work for what they have. We need to get back to the vital principles of this country, of hard work. That will fix it. That's the narrative we need, and then we put policies in place to back that, and we reverse the ones that don't support it. Thank you.
Mr. Benton.
Yes, first of all, we need to recognize that it's your money, it's all of our money. We need to recognize the moral hazard of one person asking another person to pay off their loan. That's just not moral. It's simply not. I do agree that this is a game to try and get new votes, and there's a lot of this going on. A lot of it you don't see. This one is going to kind of consumers, but there's a lot of big deals that are in the billions of dollars that are going to other types of cronies. Another thing that we should do is call out academia for participating in this. Academia has gotten a pass on this because they're widely respected in our society, but at the end of the day, they are pushing very, very expensive loans on students. And a lot of those students are saddled with a lifetime of debt, and a lot of times those loans don't have an ROI. So this is another example where the government has created a problem and is now attempting to create a new problem to claim to solve the problem. The government shouldn't be in the loan business. It should be between the people who take the loan and the institutions that they get the loan from. Government should be entirely out of it. That's a solution.
And Senator Morse.
Yeah, this is just another election year gimmick by Joe Biden and Maggie Hassan. You know, Susan and I both worked damn hard to make sure that we paid off our college loans, and we succeeded. But we earned every penny and paid it all back because we signed on the dotted line. And our daughter, Emma, we worked hard to make sure we could give her something better than we had when we grew up. We certainly were proud of her when she went to her first interview at college. And she came out of that interview, and she had already been accepted at that college. And she said to her mom, "Mom, I want to go back in for one more minute." And she went in, and she asked the school what she was going to get paid when she graduated from that program. That's what colleges should have to tell you. Colleges should have to tell you what you're going to make in an income when you graduate with that debt. So you make the decision whether or not you can pay it back. It's really what America's all about. Let's not weaken that. Maggie Hassan and Joe Biden continue to do that.
Now I'll go to Josie Albertson Grove with the union leader with a question on abortion.
The Supreme Court's decision this summer ending the constitutional protection on abortion left the decision to the states. But do you see a role for Congress on the abortion issue? And if so, what policies do you support?
And we start with Kevin Smith.
Thank you, Chris. Look, I'm pro-life. I was proud to be named the Pro-Life House Member of the Year when I served in the legislature back in 1997. I agreed with the Dobbs decision because I think this matter is best left to the states to handle. It gives the people through their legislators a voice in this particular matter. Here's what I don't agree with, though, on this issue. I don't agree with Senator Hassan's position because I find it to be vastly out of touch, extreme, and radical. She believes in abortion and has voted for this at the federal level through 9 months with no restrictions or no limitations whatsoever, and at the taxpayer expense. And I think that is vastly out of touch with most Granite Staters, even those whom consider themselves to be pro-choice. Lastly, as I said, I would vehemently oppose any taxpayer support of abortion. This is something that Chuck Morse supported and voted for just over a month ago through the Finance Committee, and that is not a vote that I would have taken.
We'll stick in order and get to Senator Morse in time, but we'll go now to General Bolduc.
Well, thank you very much. I think the Supreme Court did the right thing. They made the right decision constitutionally, and they sent it back to the states. And I think that is what it should be, where it should be. I believe that the states will handle this much better because the federal government over 50 years has done nothing but create hatred, destruction, crime. People have been hurt over this issue because the federal government was involved in something they shouldn't have been involved in from the beginning. I believe that women in the state of New Hampshire, on both sides of the issue, have a better chance of being heard by their representatives that they're closest to in the state than they do at the federal government. New Hampshire passed a law. New Hampshire passed a law that was consistent with how Granite Staters feel about abortion. They did. Can't go past 24 weeks, 6 months. They did. Now, not everyone's going to agree with that, but at the end of the day, that's what the majority of Granite Staters want. So it was the right thing to do. States in charge.
Now go to Mr. Fenton, just repeating the question. It is a discussion about the Dobbs decision from the Supreme Court several months ago.
Yes, I'm against any new federal laws related to abortion, either bans or anything kind of trying to codify abortion. Personally, I am pro-life, but as a person who's generally against new laws, especially at the federal level, I'm definitely against any federal laws related to abortion at all. And I think that it is unfortunate that this is used, especially on the left, as a wedge issue and a fundraising issue. There's attacks almost every day related to this issue, and I think that's a little bit deceptive to New Hampshire voters. Because it's the ads by Maggie Hassan and others are giving the impression that women are losing something or about to lose something in New Hampshire, and I don't think that's correct. The legislators in the State House in New Hampshire have already passed a law that actually does allow abortion up to 24 weeks. So I think it is best handled at the state level and not the federal level. Thank you,
Senator Morse.
Well, let me be clear. I'm pro-life. I believe what just happened is the way it should happen. It should be in the states. We passed in New Hampshire, under my leadership, no abortions in the 7th, the 8th, and the 9th month. We passed in New Hampshire that you can't use your tax dollars to pay for abortion. You know, I got a 100% rating from Cornerstone. I got endorsed nationally by Susan B. Anthony. There's no question where I stand on the issue. There certainly is questions on Maggie Hassan trying to push down on the states and federalize abortion. She wants to make sure that you pay for abortion throughout the pregnancy with your tax dollars. And she certainly wants to take away parental rights. I will go to Washington and make sure that doesn't happen with her party. Thank you.
Mr. Ventromani.
Yes, so I agree with the New Hampshire way. I think the 603 way on this matter is probably accurate. It reflects the will of the people. I think women should have choice for some period of time. In the state here, we've decided it should be 6 months and a ban thereafter. I'm opposed to late-term, third trimester abortions, and I sort of agree with what the senator here achieved. He provided choice for women for 6 months.
And back to Mr. Smith's claim, Senator Morse, could you discuss your decision and rationale behind the Planned Parenthood funding for 30 seconds?
Yeah, I think I've been pretty clear about this. You know, it's easy to go and come up on the stage and say things like that. There was nothing done in New Hampshire at the fiscal committee on that vote. Certainly didn't happen. Kevin knows that. I wouldn't vote for that. What I supported in New Hampshire was banning abortion in the 7th, the 8th, and the 9th month. And part of that ban, I supported the Hyde Amendment. I supported the fact that we wouldn't use your tax dollars, so you couldn't take it up at fiscal to pay for abortions. Right. So that's pretty clear.
Mr. Smith, then we'll wrap this.
Yeah, Chris, it simply isn't true. The reality is the fiscal committee took this vote, and those monies went directly to abortion providers like Planned Parenthood for $2 million. That's why the chairman of the fiscal committee, Senator Morse's colleague Gary Daniels, he voted against it because he knew exactly where that money was going. 4 hours later, after it was voted on, it showed up on the governor and council agenda, and thankfully, the council voted it down and corrected the mistake that Senator Morse made on that particular funding bill.
Senator Morse, do you wish to respond?
It's a lie. Let's be clear about it.
It's not.
It's a lie.
No, it's not.
When we took testimony in fiscal, Gary Daniels asked the question. He said, does any of this money go to Planned Parenthood? And the answer was no.
Well, then they lied.
So, Kevin, I'm speaking.
They lied because it showed up.
Let's be clear about it. That's what happened in New Hampshire. But there's nothing clearer than the fact that I got a 100% rating, Kevin, from Cornerstone, and that Susan B. Anthony endorsed me on this stage to make sure that I carry that out in this country.
All right, we're going to move on to a different topic. I believe the most important thing that Republican voters heading to Tuesday's primary are thinking about is who on this stage is the individual that could have the most success against Maggie Hassan in the general election. So the question is this: why you and not one of your opponents? We start with General Bolduc.
All right, let's get this done. Well, my name's Don Bolduc, and I'm going to beat Maggie Hassan because I have the best national security experience. And everything that we've been talking about up here on this stage is a national security threat. The economy, debt, and the safety and security of this country, both at home and abroad. I worked 33 and a half years serving this nation, doing just that, national security. You need a national security expert and someone who isn't tied to the establishment, someone who is an outsider, a political outsider, who's going to go down there and fight for you. I have been campaigning for 2 years. I've been in every town and city in this state. I've looked at Granite Staters just like yourself. I've cried with them, I've held their hands, and I understand what they're going through. That's why I will beat Maggie Hassan, because she does not.
Thank you. Mr. Benton. Again, we're going to ask to refrain from any clapping or cheering or things of that nature so we can get through this. Go ahead.
The GOP primary election is very, very different than the general election. It's as different as night and day. In the GOP primary, it is all diehard Republicans who are the most Republican of Republicans. In the general election, it is the most diehard of Democrats and all of the other Democrats and all of the independents. Independents are where the elections are won. In the last election, Maggie Hassan won by 1,017 votes. The Libertarian candidates in that election got 31,000 votes. In the election before that, the Libertarian got 18,000 votes. The Libertarian in the last election, Erin Day, The Libertarian in the election before that, Justin O'Donnell, both of them have endorsed me. Even the Big L official Libertarian candidate, Jeremy Kaufman, has said nice things about me and encouraged his voters to support me in the primary. So we need those votes. We need those independents. We need those Libertarians. That's how you win in the general. Otherwise, we could have a repeat of what we had last time with Maggie Hassan winning by 1,000 votes.
Senator Morse, why are you a better candidate than General Bolduc or Mr. Fenton?
Yeah, I beat Maggie Hassan. I've served as Senate President for 8 years. I know you only pay me $125 to do that job each year, but I do it as a volunteer. And in 2015, I took on Maggie Hassan. We produced a budget that we put on her desk to drive the economy in New Hampshire. We wanted to make sure we lowered taxes in this state. We did that. Maggie vetoed that budget. She said it was going to destroy the state of New Hampshire. We took that budget and we went to all the groups that were in that budget, and we explained it to them. And we proved to Republicans and Democrats in the state of New Hampshire that we got the job done. We properly funded things, and we put tax cuts in there to drive the economy. I beat Maggie Hassan back in 2015. I'll beat Maggie Hassan again in November this year.
Mr. Mantromani, why are you the best candidate to take on Maggie Hassan?
Well, thanks for the question, Chris. Look, all of us up here on stage are very different. Some of us have had wonderful experience at the state level. Some of us had wonderful experience down at the local level. Some have had international, national security experience. And some of us have had business experience. At the end of the day, we know that the career politicians have broken this economy. We know that. We've seen it. We see it everywhere. We know that this administration also has very few senior officials that have any private sector experience. That's the problem. We have career politicians and their appointees that have no idea how this economy works. So when you go to the voting booth, I ask you to think about what your key issue is. Is it inflation? Is it energy prices? Or is it a social policy or some state policy? If it's, in fact, a macroeconomic policy, you want a businessman. I'm your businessman. I'll prevent this from getting worse.
Mr. Smith.
Let's be clear about what's going on in this election right now. Washington, D.C. is trying to buy this seat. We have Chuck Schumer, who's flooding the markets right now, the television markets, for Don Bolduc, because he views Don as the weakest candidate to take on Maggie Hassan because of all the statements he's had to walk back. You got Mitch McConnell, who has picked Chuck Morse. That's his guy, his establishment pick, because he knows he'll toe the line for him when he's down in Washington, D.C. I'm running against Maggie Hassan because I'm the strongest conservative candidate who can beat her. I've said many times, who is it that you want on this debate stage with Maggie Hassan who can best articulate to the voters why she and her failed record over the last 6 years does not deserve another term in the United States Senate, and who can broadly appeal not only to Republicans, but also to independents and conservative Democrats about all the issues that concern them. Home heating oil, high electric rates, high gas prices, secure border. Those are the issues I've been talking to people about over the last 9 months.
30 seconds to General Bolduc. Why do you feel that Chuck Schumer has put this money up against Chuck Morse in your favor?
Well, clearly, Washington, D.C. has no damn idea what they're doing, once again, and they're meddling in New Hampshire politics, right? Wouldn't you try and convince people not to vote for the strongest candidate if you were the Democrats? Of course you would. So you'd put this ruse up, this funding up, which people who don't know anything about strategy fall for, right? This is just a trick. And they're doing it on the Democrat side and the Republican side. I have not accepted any money from anybody,
Thank you.
special interests or anything like that. I am the candidate that's here for New Hampshire, and that's the bottom line.
Senator Morse, a PAC associated with Mitch McConnell obviously has spent millions of dollars on your behalf and has an ad going up against or attacking General Bolduc. Is that something you're comfortable with, and will you stand up to Mitch McConnell if you're elected senator?
No, I think these third-party ads that are going negative are absolutely wrong. I mean, but where was everybody last week when Chuck Schumer came after me with $6 million? Came after me to basically make it so that the general would win in this election. You know, I've raised more money than anyone on this stage in the state of New Hampshire, double, in my own PAC. And I did it the right way, and I certainly have been proving to you that I'm the person that should get elected in New Hampshire.
I'm going to move on to a question on gas prices. We're going to go to Union Leader, Senior Editor Mike Cody.
Gasoline prices have hit a record high this year, though we've seen some relief over the last several weeks. Meanwhile, auto manufacturers are ramping up production of electric vehicles, and some are talking about phasing them out over the decades ahead. Meanwhile, solar and wind have gained some traction, but still probably a fifth of our energy supply. How does the U.S. maintain its energy independence? How does it transition from our reliance on fossil fuels and embrace renewable energy over the years ahead?
Bruce Fenton will start.
As with most things in the world, you can track problems back to government. Even obesity, you can track back to government policies related to everything from corn syrup to what they did to the agriculture industry in the 70s. Gas prices are no different. Continued government meddling, particularly with what I mentioned earlier, which is the creation of new money from thin air, causes record prices in all categories. And now we have government entering this new sort of field of attempting to be a venture capitalist or something like that, where they're trying to pick winners and losers and invest in areas that politicians think are going to be the next new thing or they think are going to solve some other problem. But historically, politicians have not been the best allocators of that type of capital. The private markets have been. So there is a real problem in the world, and typically those problems have been solved by unleashing the creative genius of entrepreneurs. That's exactly what we should do. We should get government out of the way and let people create the solutions that they need to solve energy independence.
Senator Morse.
We need to make America energy independent again. We were there a year and 9 months ago. We need to get back to that. We don't need Maggie Hassan's gimmicks that we're going to eliminate a gas tax until the election day. We would have had to borrow another $20 billion. That's not what we need to do in this country. We need to do what we stated in New Hampshire. We put it in legislation over a year ago. All of the above. We need to make that clear to all Americans. You choose. You choose what you believe is right. You choose what works for you. Let's get back to the fact that we want petroleum in this country. Let's get back to the fact that we want natural gas in this country. You know, if we create supplies, we'll get rid of inflation and we'll drive the economy. Let's get there. Thank you.
Mr. Mantromani.
Yeah, I'm sorry, just confused with Chuck's answer. The question's about energy policy or about EVs and sort of the forward look? Forward look, okay. So, look, I think at the end of the day, we have to understand that this electric vehicle fascination that many politicians have adopted doesn't make sense. Electric vehicles do not produce energy. They are storage devices. And in many cases, around the country, even in this state, you could have a coal-fired vehicle. That's probably a better description than an electric vehicle. Because at the end of the day, what we need is more energy. And yes, all of the above is the right way to do it. But this transition that you referenced in your question is something that is not going to come about because we decide that hydrocarbons are bad. They are cheap, reliable, and they power our economy. And by powering our economy, we will have the resources to invest in future technologies and energies. Look, the Stone Age didn't end because we got mad at the Stones. It ended because we developed a new technology called bronze. And we can do the same thing here. Let's develop a next generation energy. We can invest in fusion and other forms. America is a great country with unbelievable entrepreneurial capacity and creativity. Let's channel that to solve this problem.
Mr. Smith.
Sure, you've heard it said once already, I'll say it again. We have to become energy independent again. We are not right now. We were a net exporter of oil and gas, and we're not right now. In fact, we're looking at our enemies to see where we can get oil and gas from. We do need an all-of-the-above approach. We need to take the suspensions off of publicly leased land and unleash domestic drilling right here at home. We need to give away all of the permits, not just a third of the permits, and at the same time, take off a lot of the EPA regulations that are stifling companies from even making those particular investments. I would like to see us look at nuclear energy as well. Look what's happening in California right now. You know, they have said they're going to ban all gas-powered vehicles by 2035, and now the governor of that state is saying, oh, but don't charge your vehicles because we got a grid problem. I mean, it's an absolute mess there. This isn't something you can just flip the switch on overnight. It does have to be a transition, and you know what? When the economics actually work on green energy, that's when you'll see a lot more of it.
And we'll go to General Bolduc. Again, the question is in regard to the future of energy, and you have 60 seconds.
Well, thank you. Yeah, the future of energy. Yeah, we all need energy, right? And the transition plan that they have right now is hurting us. It really is. Look what's going on out there, right? High energy dependence begets inflation and high everything. It's all tied to the petroleum industry. We need to bring back our XL pipeline. We need to bring back fracking. We need to deregulate leases. We need to open up the permits 100%. We need to invest in nuclear fuel. We need to invest in technologies like fusion. We need to do all of these things. We need to, first and foremost, bring back our fossil fuel. That is the bedrock of everything. You can't do any of those other things without fossil fuel. And it's incumbent that we understand that and do it. Their transition plan is broke, and it's making Granite Staters broke. I see it out there, and we have to change it. And you need a fighter down there to do that. Common sense, critical thinking, plain speaking. That's what you need. Thank you.
Thank you, General Bolduc. This question from our friends at AARP New Hampshire. Many older Americans rely on Medicare for critical health coverage for older Americans. If elected, how would you strengthen it for future generations, in particular, given the emergence of the gig economy? We go to Senator Morse.
Yeah, I think we have to keep our promise with seniors. Let's be honest about it. They paid into Social Security. They paid into Medicare. That's not where we go to fix these problems in Washington. Where we go to fix these problems in Washington is having a budgeting process. Republicans standing up and saying we're not going to remove the debt ceiling so that they can go borrow more money. Let's make them create a budgeting process in Washington. I think that's the most important thing we can do to save Medicare in this country, is to make sure that we stop the borrowing and spending in Washington and we start to act like we act here in New Hampshire. We do it at our local level, we do it at our houses, and we do it up in Concord. Let's get back to that. Let's send that message to Washington.
Mr. Benchimani.
Yes, look, I agree. We have to keep our promises that have been made. So promises made, promises kept. That is a basic philosophy that I agree to. Now, with that said, I do think there's lots of inefficiency. We have no transparency. From my years in business, I learned that many a tough problem can be addressed with a simple three-part solution. A, insist on transparency. B, force some accountability onto those that are involved in the system. And lastly, introduce some competition and some choice. And I think if we have that, we will produce much better outcomes, we will have more efficiency, we will have less waste, we will have lower prices, and everyone will benefit. That will keep the system liquid and allow us to keep all the promises that have been made.
Mr. Smith.
Well, we better keep our promises to the seniors that are on Medicare and Social Security. My parents are in the audience tonight. They know where I live, so I'm going to tread lightly on this. But look, we bring down the cost of health care in this country by making having more price transparency and making it more consumer-focused and not so much insurance-focused. We need to bring back the roaring Trump economy because so much of the revenue that goes into the Medicare system comes from payroll taxes. And I think we should go from being a fee-based care to value-based care that focuses on the actual patients and outcomes and also covers pre-existing conditions as well. There can't be any price fixing, but there needs to be more competition, free market competition. Look what happened with Medicare Part D. We brought down prices by having that free market competition. Something I don't agree with is Medicare for all. I would not vote for that. I've been critical of, again, Senator Morse for voting for the Obamacare Medicaid expansion 3 times as a state senator while Maggie Hassan was governor. Again, not something I would have supported.
Thank you. We'll get back to Senator Morse once we get through this round of questions. General Bolduc, the question was in regard to the gig economy and strengthening Medicare for future generations.
Well, thank you, and it's great to see you all in the audience, and it was great to meet you earlier. America's long-term care is broken. It's broken. It's the bottom line. So what do we need to do? We need to provide coverage at home, including skilled and non-skilled care, chronic care. That's one of the things we need to do. We need to include nursing care, physical, occupational, and speech therapy. We need to have durable medical equipment that's available, nursing supplies. We need to provide the primary caregiver coverage. They get worn out. These are tough times. Our aged community, they need help. And this is what we need to do. You know, Medicare provides critical health coverage. And we need to make sure that that's there for the future. This alphabet soup program needs to be completely revised, 100% revised. It needs to be oriented to patient care, not system care.
Thanks. I will go to Senator Morse to respond to Mr. Smith's claim in regard to Medicaid expansion.
Yeah. I fought to protect the taxpayers in New Hampshire. I made sure that Maggie Hassan didn't get her way in New Hampshire. I made sure that when we passed something in New Hampshire, we passed something that made sure the taxpayers weren't going to be on the hook. You know, we got over $500 million in New Hampshire last year. In Londonderry alone, 1,041 people participate in that program. Londonderry would have to come up with $7 million to be able to take care of those needs. Remember, it was being put on our insurance policies, every one of us, every time someone chose to go to a hospital.
Londonderry's reference will go back to Mr. Smith.
Chris, look, the reason why it had to be expanded not once but 3 times in the state is because the first funding scheme they came up with was deemed illegal by the federal government. So they had to go back and come up with a new funding scheme. Currently, right now, 10% of our liquor revenue, which would go to the general fund in the state, goes to pay for this Obamacare expansion. So yes, the taxpayers actually are on the hook for it.
We'll move on now and go to Josie Albertson Grove with the union leader with a question on education.
I didn't get that question.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Fenton.
The question's on Medicare. I would like people who paid into Medicare to be able to receive the benefit that they paid in for. But the question on maintaining it for future generations, I don't want to maintain it for future generations. And the reason is because it's broken. It's a broken system. Politicians are not the answer to our problems. It is absurd that we're up here talking about all of these different things, second-guessing systems. People have been doing this for decades, and it's exactly the wrong thing to try and create solutions to problems. Politicians make things worse, and healthcare is a perfect example of that. Medicare has failed, and we simply can't afford it. We can't afford it. If they weren't printing money from thin air and devaluing everybody's currency with inflation, taxes would be much, much, much higher in order to pay for all of this. So the solution is to put more hands in the power of patients and their doctors and less hands in the power of politicians.
Again, my apologies for that, Mr. Fenton. We'll go now to Josie Albertson Grove, the union leader with a question on education.
So since 1975, federal law has required what's known as a free and appropriate education in the least restrictive setting for children with disabilities. The federal government was meant to fund about 40% of the cost of special education services, but Congress has never fulfilled that obligation, leaving the cost to states and local property taxpayers or forcing cuts to other programs. What steps do you support toward federally funding education and support services for children with disabilities?
And this question goes to Vikram Mantramani.
Yeah, well, thank you for the question, Josie. I have a daughter with special needs, and so I understand exactly what you're talking about. And I think the resources that should be provided and that are federally mandated effectively should be provided. I think that we should all support those with special needs. This is a very personal issue, like I said, and I think that there is absolutely no reason we shouldn't. Society and the tax dollars we contribute to should all be utilized to help those who are most in need. So yeah, I'm completely in favor of doing that and completely in favor of supporting that and completely in favor of funding that at the federal level if necessary. Now, of course, the states contribute what they can as well through property taxes and support at the local level. It really is sort of an all-of-the-above support system, and I think it works. And it can continue to be improved, and we can always put more resources towards it. But you know, I think it is working, and federal funding should be continued.
Thank you. Mr. Smith.
Yeah, the federal government should own up to its obligations, particularly in this matter. My wife is a first-grade special education teacher, so I'm intimately familiar with this matter as well. And the reality is right now these costs are passed along to the states and the local school districts. Londonderry, we're fortunate. We have a very robust special education program there. But the reality is you all open your tax bills up, your local tax bills, and the school is always the largest tax driver of all of the local tax bills. So the federal government should live up to its obligation, but frankly, the Department of Education doesn't have its priorities right now. It's instead hell-bent on promoting this woke culture in all of our schools. It has way too many tentacles into our local districts. I think they need to get their priorities straight, and that would start with special education. You know, they shouldn't be, students shouldn't be going to school and being taught what to think. They should be going and being taught how to think.
Thank you. General Bolduc, again, the question was in regard to the federal government and funding for special education at the local level.
Yes, I believe the federal government has a responsibility in this area, and it hasn't done what it needs to do in order to provide the states and the local level with the tools and money that they need in order to be able to take care of our very special children, right? They are special. They're gifts from God, and God watches how we take care of them, and we need to take care of them the best we can. I meet them all over this great state. Federal government must keep its promise. The fact that it doesn't is terrible. We give millions of dollars to other countries to study mating habits of crickets and all kinds of other things. We need to divert that money into these types of programs that make our country stronger. When we invest in our children across the board, this nation becomes stronger. That's what this is about. It's about taking care of our children and our God-given responsibility to do so. Thank you.
Mr. Penton.
This is why we have $20 trillion in debt and an ever-expanding government, because we have even Republicans who continually can't say no to things that sound good. It sounds good, yes, but no. The federal government especially shouldn't be involved in this. Politicians are not our solution. What we just heard the other candidates basically say is they want to come into your pocket under the name of compassion and something that sounds good. They want to come into your pocket, send it down to bureaucrats in fancy offices in Washington, D.C., have them sit around their meetings, 1 million federal employees, many of whom make over $100,000 a year. They're going to sit around and they're going to have meetings. Some of them, by the way, aren't even back to work. They're still home from the COVID scares. They're going to sit around and they're going to decide how to allocate our money, and they're going to send it back. And somehow this will theoretically trickle down to benefiting disabled students in New Hampshire. It won't. It's a sham. Politicians are not your answer. We need to keep the money back in the hands of the state and in the hands of the voters. That's the solution, not politicians in Washington, D.C.
Senator Morse.
Well, I've done it. You know, I think Washington has to live up to their promises. But here in New Hampshire, when the Democrats were running it, and we came out of the last recession that they dealt us with an $800 million deficit, we certainly worked to make sure that we helped those people in New Hampshire that needed it the most. Republicans in New Hampshire get it. They develop budgets that live within their means and fund what you should be funding. This is a subject that we as Americans should be funding, and we should be living up to our means on it. We've done it here in New Hampshire. We eliminated institutions in New Hampshire. We asked parents to help us. We gave them the ability to do that. And every time we build a budget in New Hampshire, we look at that and we say that's what we're going to do first. It's the right thing to do.
Thank you, Senator Morse. A year ago, definitely 2 years ago, it would be unthinkable that we did not begin the debate by discussing COVID and COVID-19, the pandemic. We sit here 2.5 years after things shut down as a result of the pandemic, and it's a two-parter. The question is, how do you assess how it was handled at the federal and state level, and how should it be handled moving forward? We start with Mr. Smith.
I don't think it was handled very well, to be quite honest. You know, I've said many times that on the issue that has affected all Americans the most over the last 2 years, we have very little answers still. You know, we've had more congressional hearings on the origins of alien abductions in our country than we have on the origins of the COVID pandemic. And why is that? We don't have any answers. We haven't held China accountable. You know, the WHO did a sham investigation of China. They parrot all of the propaganda they put out. and yet we haven't done any investigation ourselves. You know, Dr. Fauci is set to retire in December, but he's not going to get away very easily, especially when the Republicans take back the majority. He needs to be held account as well. There needs to be a full investigation into everything that happened, why it happened, why there was so much information, and why it's still happening, Chris. Chris, I just found out literally 10 minutes before I walked up here that at Keene State, where my son's going to college, they're implementing another mask mandate only in the classes for the next 2 weeks. This is absolute absurdity. It's nuts. It has to stop.
I'll give everybody 75 seconds on this because it is a bigger topic. We'll go to General Bolduc.
Oh, thank you. So, local, state, and federal level failed us. They failed us in every way. The elected officials and the appointed officials at all three levels failed us. They locked us down. They took our rights away. They closed our businesses. They masked our children and apparently are continuing to do that. They hurt small business owners. 449 businesses closed. Over 200 did not come back. They hurt our elderly and elderly care facilities. This is terrible what they did. It's wrong, and I hear it from Granite Staters all over this state. That is exactly why when they come to you to look for your vote, to say, oh, yeah, I know I hurt you, you know, well, they don't even say that. There's no accountability, responsibility, transparency, or truth. But they want your vote, and some of them want to get voted into higher levels. I say hell no to that. It's wrong. Enough is enough. We need leadership. We need people that have the experience. I handled the Ebola crisis in Africa, and successfully, and it came to this country, and we did not close it down. Ebola.
Thank you.
This is wrong. Thank you.
Mr. Fenton.
The politicians' reaction to COVID was absolutely unacceptable. It was the type of tyranny we haven't seen in our country in our lifetimes. Absolutely and completely unacceptable assault on freedom. And it is a system that is unworkable. I come from tech and finance, and we think a lot about what is workable, how will this break, how could this be attacked. A system where a politician who calls himself a scientist can shut down our nation and close businesses and order nurses to have an injection in their arm and order our children to wear a political signal over their face is not workable in a free society, and it is absolutely, completely, and totally unacceptable. It is against everything I believe, and I will fight it with every fiber of my being. I will never, ever comply with any request to produce a vaccine passport. If I'm sent down to the United States Senate, I will never wear a mask on that floor, and I will fight every day for freedom, for people to make their own choice. It is the only way forward. Otherwise, there's going to be the kind of situation we don't want to have in the United States. We must let everybody alone and let each person make their own decisions.
Senator Morse, again, the question is in regard to how the pandemic was handled at the state and federal level in retrospect, and what should be done in regard to the virus moving forward.
Yeah, I think what's happened in Washington during this time period is wrong. I think the CDC sent all the wrong messages back to the states and certainly should be investigated when we go through this process. I don't believe in mandates. I don't believe we should have been closing businesses. I fought continually to make sure that that didn't happen in New Hampshire. But we were getting bad advice, and we were getting advice on masks and everything else. We fought against that here in New Hampshire. We fought to open the State House as soon as possible to make sure that you could express yourself. I think that's what we have to do. But it starts with investigating the CDC as to why they were corrupt and why they were running things the way they were running them, because they certainly weren't giving us the right direction.
Mr. Benjamini.
Yes. So look, I think the main problem here was expert arrogance. It was that they think they knew better outside of their domains of expertise. We had public health officials describing a situation that sounded scary. And of course, in hindsight, we all know that it wasn't as bad as it was. The 2 weeks to quote unquote flatten the curve turned into 2 years that flattened the middle class. It's not okay. We need to understand why it happened. But the expert overreach, really forcing lockdowns, resulted in untold costs on so many people on a mental health basis. What kind of isolation impact did that have on the elderly, on young children? It caused developmental delays in kids in school that were unable to understand human-to-human interaction. And what was the cost of a missed mammogram? I don't know, but it wasn't zero. What was the cost of missed dental appointments? I don't know, but it wasn't zero. And what was the cost to our kids in our schools? It was pretty high. We know that. And these costs were not factored in. And again, the root of it is career politicians, experts, thinking they know better than each of us knows about ourselves. Individual freedom and rights. That's what we need to prioritize.
Thank you. We're going to go to Lily Geber now with a question on school safety. Lily is with the New Englander, the student newspaper here at New England College.
Over the last 2 decades, our country has had many deadly and tragic school shootings. With each one follows a debate about whether laws need to change to keep our children safe. If you had the power to enact one change today, what would it be?
And the question goes to General Bolduc.
I would hold people accountable for their actions. Is that all you wanted to hear? You want me to continue? It's a people problem. People fail to secure the schools. People fail in their response. And people fail to go after those that make threats. And when people fail, bad things happen, particularly in this area. Now, I know where you're going with this, right? The gun is bad. 33 and a half years in the military, I never punished a gun for doing anything wrong. It was accountability and responsibility for the individual. And that's what this society has done. They've created this because we lack accountability and responsibility. Sound familiar, Lily? Sound like a leadership class to you? Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Accountability, responsibility, transparency, truth. We got to get at the root cause of the problem. We have to make sure people are held accountable. Thank you.
Mr. Benton.
There are a lot of problems. Politicians tend to be put in situations and often try and act as if they can solve everything. No politician can solve issues like violence and things like that. These are something that has plagued humanity for thousands of years, and there are tragedies in our world. I can tell you what our solution is not, and that is it is not a solution to decrease freedom and to have more gun laws, because there are always second-order effects. In the case of firearms, the reason that we have firearms in the United States is to protect against governments. And I know a lot of people think that that sounds fanciful, but we should remember that 300 million people have been killed by their own governments just in this century. Is it extremely, extremely dangerous and deadly force? And that's why we have it. That's why we have this right, and that right can't be infringed. There are certainly drawbacks of that, but I think we'd be attacking the problem incorrectly to look at it as a gun issue. We should be looking at psych drugs, isolation, all kinds of other issues, and better safety with armed teachers and better responses.
Thank you, Senator Morse. Again, the question is in regard to school safety. What can be done to address the issue of school safety?
Yeah, I think we are addressing it here in New Hampshire. What we said in New Hampshire in 2017 is we need to get involved with school safety. We need to get involved with mental health issues. We're doing that. You know, I was endorsed by the NRA, and I can tell you your question actually started with, what thing would you do if you went to Washington? You know, I do believe if you're a juvenile and you commit a violent crime, it should travel with you in the NICS system when you become an adult. I think that's a change we could agree on and we could accomplish. But I also think as a country, we ought to do what New Hampshire did. We spent a lot of money making sure we were hardening our schools during this time period. We certainly worked hard to make sure on mental health that we were providing for our citizens. We just bought a hospital because we knew we had to start doing more, and we are accomplishing that here in this state.
Thank you. Mr. Manchermani.
Yes, I agree with a lot of what's been said here, but I want to highlight one topic that I think is contributing to the mental health crisis, and that has to do with social media and technology, and the fact that we're having a lot of unnecessary anxiety and depression built among some of the youth because of this overly tech-focused reality they live in. We need to go back to family values. We need to have more community. We need kids that are playing outside, not sitting in front of screens, because the social media, the algorithms, etc., they're prone to produce anxiety and depression. And the reason that's so is because, you know, imagine putting a post up today. You're not going to put a post up that says, oh, you know, my significant other just dumped me, or I had a job interview and it failed. You're going to say, this was great. This was great. Look at us. And it turns out that life is not always that rosy, positive act, you know, all good things happen. And so those who are living in this social media bubble end up seeing a world that is better than it is, and they feel depressed and left out. It exacerbates some of the anxiety and depression that's contributing to mental health. We need to address that as well.
Vikram apparently doesn't follow me on Twitter. We'll go to Kevin Smith now.
Thank you, Chris. I would do exactly what we did in Londonderry during the time I was town manager. When I came on as town manager, we had one school resource officer. Today, we have school resource officers at all the schools. They are very well trained, and they're very well equipped with the best equipment in an active shooter case. We increased the infrastructure so that the school cameras talk to our cameras at the police dispatch in real time. We increased the infrastructure at the schools. We hardened the schools, so there's one point of entry. So if in the case that an active shooter does make its way in, they're going to be immediately met by one of those well-equipped, well-trained school resource officers. And I would support funding. You know, we did all of that at the local level. Again, we were fortunate enough in Londonderry that taxpayers supported that. But in those communities that can't afford that, I would support more funding for school resource officers, for better hardened schools, and also for increased funding for mental health as well, because that is a serious issue.
Thank you. We go now to Mike Cody, business editor and senior editor at the Union Leader, with a question on immigration.
How does the U.S. develop an immigration policy that not only secures our borders, but allows for the efficient legal immigration so we can get workers for manufacturing, technology, tourism? And we have unemployment stuck in New Hampshire at 2%. That's been going on for several years. With the exception of the pandemic, it's back to where it was a couple years ago, under 2%.
Mr. Fenton.
Well, I believe in our core values as a nation. We're a nation built and based on immigration and immigrants. Most of us are descendants of immigrants. And immigrants have been there for us building our country throughout our entire history. And they're needed more now than ever. I talk to business owners in New Hampshire all of the time, and they all need employees. And having more immigrants here would be excellent to serve that. So I believe in a much more open immigration policy that lets people in. I don't believe in letting people sneak in. I don't believe in breaking the rules, and I don't believe in having a border wall that looks like Swiss cheese where anybody can just walk through. I think we should have a solid wall and solid controls. It's just like my house. I had a get-together for supporters this weekend. I let a lot of people come to my house, to my farm in Durham. We open it, even though our town is, I think, 68% Democrat. We open it, let everybody walk at our farm, but we keep controls of it. That's what we should do with our border. We should have solid controls, but be friendly and let people in. The only way we're going to do that is by ending entitlements.
Senator Morse.
Yeah, I've been pretty clear about this. When I go to Washington, we end catch and release. We build the wall, and we're a nation of laws. We follow the laws. You can't negotiate that away. That's where we start. We get it done. Let's get back to where we were. I certainly think that the discussions on visas and how we run this country, we're all hearing it on the campaign trail. We're all hearing how it used to work. We can get there. But if we're not going to stand for something as Republicans like closing the border and making sure we build the wall and make sure we follow the laws that exist today, we really have a problem. We really need to get there first and get that done.
Mr. Mantromani, the question is in regard to addressing illegal immigration, but also addressing workforce issues via legal immigration.
Sure. So I agree we need to secure the border. A secure border is something that would be absolutely critical. We need to stop the illegal immigration. I believe in a tall wall. However, I also believe in a wide gate because this is a nation of immigrants. My parents came here seeking a better life. They were legal immigrants. The proudest days of their lives were when they handed in their green cards and took an oath to this Constitution and received their naturalization papers. this is a great country that offers a ton of opportunity for people who come in legally, put their head down, work hard, contribute, and actually make this society better. So yes, we need to loosen some of the legal immigration constraints. We have a quota system that's broken. We have all sorts of employer-based visa programs that are broken and can be relaxed. You know, relaxing the H-1B visa program actually would not create competitive forces because that's employer-based employment and they have to pay prevailing wages. So we have lots of ways to do this legally.
Mr. Smith.
I agree in fixing our legal immigration problem. It would help with our staffing shortage. But look, any comprehensive reform has to start with securing the border. I went down to the border in February, met with the U.S. Border Patrol Council. I'm the only candidate that has put forward a border security plan that has been endorsed by the U.S. Border Patrol Council. It includes, number one, going back to the Remain in Mexico policy. Number two, finishing the border wall along strategic areas in our southern border. Number three, having an E-Verify system or something similar for all employers here in the United States. Number four, ending sanctuary cities. And number five, ending the catch and release. Right now, we apprehend illegal migrants, and then they're pretty much told you're now free to go and roam about the country. I made the joke that they're the only people right now that can find direct flights to anywhere in the country. The rest of us can't. And that simply isn't right. And we're giving them a lot of benefits at the same time. So yes, we do need to reform our legal. It shouldn't be easier right now to get into the country illegally than legally. That's a problem, but it has to start with securing the border.
Thank you. General Bolduc.
Border security begets fair, honest, and legal immigration system. And we are so far out of whack right now with our border security, with everybody rushing the border. Three main areas of the border, Yuma, Eagle Pass, Del Rio, one person crossing every second, every 24 hours of the day. This is unbelievable. You can't even get control of the immigration process until we close this border, until we put a wall up, until we secure this nation. Once we do that, then we can move resources to our CBP that are vitally needed, and our ICE, and we can put courts down near the border. So you have a 96-hour process, apprehension, processing through ICE, and then legal adjudication, either coming in or you're going out. It all depends on whether or not you're trying to get in legally.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Another question from our sponsor at ARP New Hampshire, nonpartisan debate series sponsor. Many Granite Staters view Social Security as a promise that must be kept. If elected, how would you protect earned Social Security benefits for the future? And I'll add, what do you view the solvency of Social Security being at this point? We start with Senator Morse.
Yeah, I think this is the same answer as Medicare, to be honest with you. We have an obligation to make sure that we protect you. You paid into it. You should get what you paid into. I think that's the important message that we should send. If you're sending me down to Washington, I'm going down to fight for you. When I get down there, what they need to do is start to fix the mess they have in budgeting. They don't even know their revenues. Senator Scott came to New Hampshire and spoke to us. And he certainly made it clear in Newport that when he goes to budget meetings, no one knows where the revenues are going in this country. They don't know the dollars they're going up. They don't know the percentages. And he did it for 2 years, and he explained how it happened. We need to make this country understand exactly what you do at home at the kitchen table on how you pay your bills. Let's get to that.
Mr. Mantromani.
Yes, when it comes to Social Security, I believe promises made, promises kept. Very simply put. It's your money. It was put into the fund. It is for your benefit. Now, going forward, the solvency of the system is at risk. It's not stable. It will not be sustainable for the indefinite future as it's currently run. And so we need to start thinking about whether the youngest generations, those that are just entering the workforce, have a different situation, a different promise is made to them. And maybe that turns into a system where it says, okay, you know what, it's been a defined benefit program for the last period of time, and going forward, 20, 30, 50 years from now, it is going to be a defined contribution plan. And we are not going to try to keep up with it in the way that it's been maintained for now. But for those that have paid in and are expecting the benefits, that have planned for the benefits, they deserve those benefits. And I would fight to maintain those benefits.
Mr. Smith.
Yeah, so again, let's be clear. Anyone who has paid into the system already and is currently receiving benefits or about to receive benefits, there should be and there will be no changes made to that. We need to get inflation under control, because the higher inflation is, the more that eats into the solvency of the Social Security system. I agree with what Vikram just said too about looking at future generations, you know, those who aren't paying into the system yet, and looking at moving away from a defined benefit to more of a defined contribution plan. But the reason why I think there's been no solutions to the solvency matter on this is because the Democrats have demonized this issue so much that anytime the Republicans talk about it, they immediately use it as a political weapon. That's wrong. That is absolutely wrong, and we have to stop letting them do it. We are the party of solutions. We are the party of looking forward, and we can't be afraid to talk about Social Security for future generations.
General Bolduc, how would you protect Social Security, and how do you view its solvency currently?
So I have been demonized by the other side. They have publicly stated, and they have a commercial out saying that I will take away your Social Security benefits, and that's absolutely not true. We need to protect those. It's your money. You paid into them. And they do use it as a political tool, as just was stated. And it's absolutely wrong, playing on your emotions, because that's what they want. They don't want you to have common sense and critical thinking. Social Security system doesn't work right because Congress gets in its way. It steals your money, takes it out of there, doesn't put it back, and then says it's insolvent. It's terrible. They're stealing from you again, money that you put in there that you deserve, and it should never, ever go away. And we should invest in future generations under a different system. I've talked to my 3 boys about this, who are grown through college and got their own businesses. So this is a promise. We keep it, we look to the future, and we revise it, we reform it to work. Thank you.
Mr. Fenton.
Well, we should cover the people who paid into it, and then we should end the program, because again, government is not the solution. I would urge anybody to look into my historic comments. I've been very, very, very consistent about a lot of these things for a long time. And there's a video, I'll make sure it's linked prominently. In 2002, I was talking about this issue because those of us in finance knew the data. We knew about the baby boomer wave with 70 million baby boomers who change everything they touch from cradle to grave, and that they would be leaving the tax base and taking from the system in the form of Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, welfare, and the tax revenue would go down, and that there wouldn't be enough money. So I was actually talking about that in 2002, and in that same video, I actually, because of this same demographic trend, I actually predicted the 2008 crash, and that's on video. There's many, many things like that on video that have been captured, and that's exactly the point. We should understand these things. Politicians weren't paying attention 5 years, 10 years, 20 years ago when the writing was on the wall and it was very clear that this was a problem, and we need to have real solutions. And the key is not somebody who's going to be a technocrat who's going to go in there and think of some magic better plan. The simple plan is to just put more power and money back in the hands of the people that earned it and let them decide.
We'll now go to Josie Albertson Grove with the Union Leader with the question on water security.
So southern New Hampshire and seacoast towns have seen their water contaminated with per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, often called PFAS or forever chemicals, from manufacturers, landfills, former Pease Air Force Base. And last month, the EPA moved to designate 2 kinds of PFAS as hazardous. So I'm curious about what role you see for the EPA in cleaning up PFAS and in designating new hazardous substances as we learn more about health risks.
We'll start with Vikram Mantremani.
Yes, look, our environment, especially here in the Granite State, is something we all cherish, something we all want to protect. Whether it's the water, the air, the soil, it is all super important. I live up in Lincoln, up in the White Mountains, and it is a beautiful spot, and we want to cherish and maintain that environment. So I do believe that actually we should be protecting the environment from all sort of illegal, hazardous, or even potentially medically harmful substances getting into our water supply. And for those companies that sort of knowingly dumped or that have some evidence, they need to be held accountable, right? In those cases where these products were known to be bad and were still disposed of into our environment, they need to be held accountable. And that needs to happen because We simply cannot allow these externalities, these costs, to be pushed onto people in the form of health impacts as well as environmental impacts that we, in many cases, we don't even know what the full impact is going to be, right, from a medical or other reason. So, yes, accountability is the key here, and we need to get control of it.
Mr. Smith.
Well, I'm intimately familiar with this, having been the chairman of the Pease Development Authority and also the town manager in Londonderry. The reality is when the environmental agencies, both at the state level and federal level, lowered the limits from 70 parts per trillion to 12 parts per trillion, suddenly there were a lot of infected wells in town. And what we've done thus far to help mitigate the problem is using town funds, holding those responsible parties, if we can find them, to pay for some of it as well, and also using state and federal grants. And actually, I applaud Senator Morse. We worked with Senator Morse on the state level to help mitigate this problem in Londonderry. But the reality is when they're going to set these standards, they can't keep the local communities and the states holding the bag to fix the problem. They have to step in and try to help us fix it, because ultimately it falls on all of the local taxpayers, and everyone deserves to have clean drinking water in this state and in this country.
General Bolduc.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'm a product from bad drinking water for 33 and a half years in the military, because every single military installation has polluted water. And it's not because someone lowered parts per trillion, it's because it's nasty, right? It's nasty. You know what I mean? And we got to do something about that. This isn't just a New Hampshire problem, this is a national problem. And I want to trust our local and state level officials and elected officials, but more importantly, the people, to fix this problem by getting rid of the federal EPA. It gets in our way, and it's too expensive. And the states can handle it better by working with other states across their borders. It's a simple solution. It's common sense. Get the federal government out of the way in this area, allow the towns and cities to be able to do what they need to do, empower the state to be able to work, and if the federal government needs to give some money to help out, then that is a damn good cause to do it. Healthy drinking water for our children and our families. Thank you.
Mr. Fenton, the question is on water security here in New Hampshire.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm glad my dad is here joining us tonight. He raised me to be an environmentalist. He's been a very passionate environmental activist his whole life. And I live on the beautiful Great Bay, which is one of the most important estuaries in the world.
Mm-hmm.
I care a great deal about this. A lot of times people mistake my philosophy as being no to all government. I do think that there are areas that government involvement is legitimate, particularly the protection of life, liberty, and property. I'd like to see a government limited to that, and that's been consistent with all of my answers. I do, however, consider your environment to be part of your property, and I do consider it a violation of somebody's rights if their air or their water is polluted, if they're a New Hampshire citizen or anything else. So I do actually think that is one of the very few legitimate areas that I would advocate the use of government force, and we have to remember that government is force at the end of the day. So it is legitimate to protect, but the way to do that is not through the federal government. Ideally, we should do that as much on a local and state level as possible.
Senator Morse.
Yeah, I continue to volunteer. Governor Sununu in 2016 declared that we all should have the ability to have clean drinking water. He was scared to death that New Hampshire was going to be facing challenges, and he wanted to make sure that we took care of it. We did. We set up processes in New Hampshire that worked with communities to make sure we developed projects. Plastown, New Hampshire had no opportunity of getting water. None. There was no place to go. They couldn't drill a well. Everything was contaminated. We worked hard to make sure that we brought water from Manchester, through Derry, through Wyndham, through Salem, through Atkinson, through Hampstead, over to Plastown. We just turned it on last week. We made sure that we provided good, clean drinking water. I don't think there's anything more important in the state of New Hampshire than doing that and protecting the environment around drinking water, and it should all be science-based.
Thank you, Senator Morse. Our final question tonight will come from Mike Cody, Senior Edit Union Leader, and it's on foreign policy.
The war between Russia and the Ukraine has lasted longer than anyone could have predicted. creating a stalemate and chaos in the energy market. The U.S. has supplied money and weapons but has otherwise muted its involvement. How does the U.S. best keep its citizens safe and protect its access to foreign markets?
And that question is going to go to Mr. Smith. Sorry. Mr. Smith, sorry about that.
That's right.
I think he knew.
Thank you, Chris. Look, it has gone on for far longer, I think, than anyone anticipated. And the reality is we have to set our priorities here. You know, we've had a feckless foreign policy leadership out of the Biden administration, from the debacle withdrawal in Afghanistan to leading from behind with Ukraine. You know, when Secretary Pompeo was here in the States, someone asked him a question: do you think Putin would have invaded Ukraine had yourself and Donald Trump still been in power? And his answer was, I can't say for certain they wouldn't, but they didn't. The reality is we used to have a peace through strength policy, foreign policy here in the country, and we don't anymore. And our adversaries around the world can see this. I see China as an existential threat right now to the United States. President Xi's going for an unprecedented third term right now. And so we've got issues in the South China Sea that we have to deal with. I do not believe giving endless amounts unaccounted money to Ukraine.
General Bolduc.
Yes, thank you. So first things first, let's just say that we have no policy and strategy. So therefore, at this point, no policy and strategy, no more funding to the Ukraine. It's insane to do that, and it's what gets us in 20-year wars and 7,000 dead Americans and hundreds of thousands of casualties to boot. I know that. I lived it. Policy and strategy is the key, and we need to hold our Commander-in-Chief and our Secretary of State and Defense and everybody else in the national security apparatus accountable for that. But right now, they're not accountable. They're not responsible, and that's the biggest problem we have. And what's happening right underneath our nose? China. North Korea, Iran are becoming a huge threat. China is an existential threat to this country. Huge existential threat. And we need a China-resistant strategy across the board: diplomatic, information, political, military, economic. We're going to find ourselves in a bigger war, and I don't want that, and the Americans don't want that. Thanks.
Mr. Fenton.
We've had a poor foreign policy for several decades now, and it's mainly characterized by meddling in foreign wars of aggression, starting wars all over the world, involving ourselves in conflicts that are not our own. And we don't seem to learn. We made grave errors in Iraq and Afghanistan. Remember, we were in Afghanistan twice. The first time was with much fanfare in a movie that starred Tom Hanks, called Charlie Wilson's War, where we, made this out as if it was some noble effort. And what we were really doing is training bomb makers who then went and made bombs that blew off the arms and legs of our men. These are completely unacceptable blunders that we keep making, and I don't understand how people can't see it as clear as day in Ukraine. Maybe it's from being in the investment business for 30 years. I have a scam radar, and to me, Zelensky seems like a scammer. I know that's very controversial. He's a comedian, entertainer, turned influencer, and he's scamming us out of billions of dollars. And I know that's controversial. I know a lot of people really, really don't like that term, but I would invite them to go ahead and send their own money to Zelensky if they don't think he's a scammer.
Thank you.
Let the taxpayers keep their own wages.
Senator Morse.
Yeah, I think President Biden, with Maggie Hassan's help, has basically destroyed the leadership in this country. We were a country that had an energy policy that made us first. We weren't asking Russia for oil. We weren't asking Venezuela for oil. We weren't asking OPEC nations for oil. We can do it cleaner and better here in this country. We're only going to lead if we get back to policies like making America energy independent. Get back to those policies. Let's get back to a policy of strength by closing the border and making sure we follow our own laws. Let's get back to strength by making sure we have a country that can live within its means. President Biden has made a mockery of the United States. He started with Afghanistan. We lost 13 of our own people. That's wrong. We need to be a strong country. We need to show leadership, and we need to stop supporting his policies. And we should send that message to Maggie Hassan when we send her back to being a lawyer, because she doesn't belong in Washington.
Mr. Manchamani.
Yes. I agree with a lot of what was just said, that America needs to restore its strength. When America is strong, our enemies take notice. And when America is weak, they take advantage. Let's understand how we got to the Ukraine situation. In 2014, Russia invaded Crimea. They got a slap on the wrist. Later, also during the Obama-Biden administration, the Chinese militarized some islands in the South China Sea. What'd they get? A slap on the wrist. And then, of course, we had the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, where we didn't even inform our own allies that this was happening. And, of course, Putin took notice, and what did he do? He invaded Ukraine. So this world was produced through our own telegraphing of weakness. We need to restore that strength. I've spent time on the ground in over 70 nations doing business. I have seen that the threat from China is real. That is where we now need to telegraph strength. And that means not being dependent on China for pharmaceutical ingredients, rare earths, or technology components that power our economy. We need to develop American strength again.
Thank you. We've reached the portion of the evening where we're going to have our closing statements. Candidates drew the order prior to tonight's contest, and Mr. Fenton will go first. Each candidate has 90 seconds.
Thank you. I want gay married couples to be able to own fully automatic weapons to protect their marijuana plants. That may not be thought of as a typical Republican position, but I've got all of these Republicans willing to support me if I win the nomination. And that's the future of the Republican Party. It's got to be big tent. It's got to be big tent. It's got to reach out to Gen Z. It's got to reach out to the Democrats and reach out to the independents, and I can do that. I can unify the Republicans, the Sununu people, the Morse people, the Bulldog people, the Trump people, the McConnell people. I'm not a McConnell person. I'm not a Trump person either, but I'm somebody who can unify everybody. I've done it in my career. I've done it for 30 years. I'm much better at making friends than enemies. One of the unfortunate things about this political process is that it is a zero-sum game where somebody must win and somebody must lose. But I'm much more about building bridges and building connections and unifying. And that is what our country desperately, desperately needs. Those values I mentioned may not sound like Republican values, but they are. They are the values that will get us through this. Because right now, half the country doesn't believe what the other half believes. Half the country hates the other half. The only way we can move forward as a nation is exactly those principles. Whether we agree or not, we've got to let people believe, worship, read, say what they want, and do what they want, provided they harm no other. It's the only way forward. It's the way that our country was built. It's what our founding fathers knew is the answer. It's the New Hampshire way, and it's the American way. We've got to unify as a nation and move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. General Bolduc.
We live in a wonderful state. We live in a great country. And I've traveled across this state, and I've been to every town and city. I've invested the time to talk to Granite Staters from every demographic, across all political beliefs. And I know what they think because I've listened and I've learned. I've been to 3 places in particular that strike me as something that we need to do. Unity, freedom, and liberty. My duty description in the United States Senate will be this: we, the people, in order to form a more perfect union. You hear that? We, the people, in order to form a more perfect union, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, secure the blessings of liberty for ourselves and our posterity. That's for you and me and our children and our grandchildren, and it's up for grabs right now with the direction that this country is going in. Do ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States of America based on principles in our Declaration of Independence of life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, these things that were given to us by God, and He counts on men and women to protect. And right now, we're being let down. You need a strong U.S. Senator with leadership capability and capacity. God bless you, God bless America, and live free or die. Thank you.
Yes, total applause to the end. Mr. Manchermani.
Yes. Well, look, I'm the son of 2 working-class immigrants that came to this shining city on a hill seeking a better life. And America offered a promise that it didn't matter what your background was. It didn't matter what your parents' profession was. It didn't matter what kind of money you had in your pocket. But with hard work, putting your head down, and working diligently towards your self-improvement, that you could offer literally a better life and more opportunities to not only your own family, but to your offspring and to your future generations. My parents came here. My dad worked hard, improved himself, and he and my mother lived the American dream. And by that, I mean they have offered their children a set of opportunities that were not available to them. You know, look, they were refugees that effectively left India. They could have gone other places. They came to the United States because the United States offered this promise, this set of opportunities. You know, Ronald Reagan has a great quote. He said, you can move to Germany, you can move to Turkey, you can move to Japan, but you'll never, ever be a German, a Turk, or a Japanese person. You'll never be acknowledged as such. You know what? I'm an American. Despite what the woke cultural left might tell you about the hyphens and the acronyms you need to come up with, I don't need any of them. I define myself as an American, and I want to serve and give back to this great nation.
Mr. Benchimani, thank you so much. Mr. Smith.
Well, thank you for coming this evening. You know, over the last decade, I've had the great honor of overseeing the state's 3 largest economic engines as both the town manager of Londonderry and chairman of the Pease Development Authority, and haven't gotten great fiscal and economic results while doing so. But over the last 3 decades, I believe I have built the most successful conservative record of any of the candidates up here. From the time I served in the New Hampshire legislature and was named the pro-life House Member of the Year in 1997 to being a founding member of the House Republican Alliance, I have a conservative voting record. So not only am I a conservative fixer, but I'm a fighter as well. And more than ever, we need a new generation of conservative fighters who are going to go to Washington and save America from this socialist agenda of Joe Biden, supported by Maggie Hassan, and fix the problem so many people are concerned about. You know, we've had an absent senator in this state. I've called Maggie Hassan Maggie Hasn't, because Maggie hasn't been standing up for us here in New Hampshire. Maggie hasn't done anything about the high inflation, the high gas prices. Maggie hasn't done anything to help secure the border. Maggie hasn't done anything about parental rights and education. Maggie hasn't stood for New Hampshire, and I will as your U.S. Senator. So I humbly ask for your vote on September 13th, and together united in November, we will save America from Joe Biden's socialist agenda. We will defeat Maggie Hassan, and we will make our conservative voice matter again in the United States Senate. Thank you, and God bless.
Thank you. Senator Morse.
I'm Chuck Morse, and I am running for the U.S. Senate. And it's been an honor to serve you as the Senate President. And working with Governor Sununu, we just created the most conservative budget in the state's history. We lived within our means. We lowered taxes. We sent $500 million back to the people. And the whole time I've served you, I said I would cut business taxes in New Hampshire. We did that. I said we would get rid of the interest and dividends tax in New Hampshire. We did that. I said we'd eliminate constitutional carry we'd have constitutional carry in New Hampshire, and I did that. I told you we'd protect the sanctity of life in New Hampshire, and we protected it in the 7th, the 8th, and the 9th month. I told you we'd create education freedom accounts so children had choices in New Hampshire. We did that. And I beat Maggie Hassan in 2015. I overrode her veto with Republicans and Democrats coming together to beat her. I can do it again in November. I ask for your support on September 13th, and more than anything, I ask for your vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Morse. I want to thank all the candidates for being in this race. It is very difficult what you guys are doing, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for what you have done, putting your names on the ballot. So congratulations on that. I want to wish everybody in the audience a tremendous evening. I'll be back tomorrow with the 1st Congressional District. I am Chris Ryan from New Hampshire Today. Thank you.